Ever catch yourself thinking about how humor, the thing that makes us laugh, can actually have a huge impact on, like, what we believe and our relationships?
It's wild, right?
Yeah. And that's what we're diving into today. We're going through the social psychology of humor to see how humor works on us, both personally and as part of society.
It's really interesting, isn't it, how we often just see humor as, like, fun and games,
Yeah?
but it goes so much deeper than that. It really shapes how we see the world, even how we act.
Totally. So, The Social Psychology of Humor, edited by Madelyn Strick and Thomas E. Ford. This is going to be our guide today. Let's just jump right in with something that I thought was really interesting, the persuasive power of humor. And it's not just about, like, selling us that new gadget or something, is it?
No, not at all. The book talks about this difference between, like, one-sided humor,
Uh,
which is kind of pure, lighthearted, just fun,
mm-hmm.
and then two-sided humor.
Yeah.
And that mixes positive and negative emotions. And that's where it starts to get interesting in terms of persuasion.
So, are we talking like a classic feel-good ad versus something that makes you think a little bit while you're laughing?
Exactly. Imagine, say, a comedian tackling a really serious issue, like the importance of education, right? They might use humor to kind of grab your attention. But then weave in some personal stories, things that make you really think about the struggles some kids are facing. And that can make their point much, much stronger.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Pulling on the heartstrings a little bit while making you laugh. And so this two-sided humor thing, this actually makes us think more about the message we're hearing. Is that right? I think there was that one study they talked about.
Yeah. They think that this sort of blend of emotions, it creates this mental push and pull. And you wouldn't think it, but it can actually lead to people paying more attention, really analyzing what's being said.
So it's about making you feel something more, not just making you laugh, right? The book used this phrase, being moved by humor, which I thought was interesting.
Right, that feeling of like really being touched, maybe even tearing up a little, but you're also laughing.
Yeah.
That's a sign that the humor's really hit a nerve,
Yeah.
that it's making you think on a deeper level.
It makes me think about like Trevor Noah on The Daily Show when he did that whole segment on climate change. And he managed to make it funny, but also like really drive home how urgent of an issue it is.
And that is a perfect example of how you can use humor skillfully to really open up these discussions, these difficult topics.
So it's like the humor, it kind of lowers our defenses in a way. So we're more open to hearing these ideas that maybe we would normally shy away from.
Yeah.
Speaking of maybe sensitive topics, what about political humor? The book actually suggests that it can sway our political views and actions.
Absolutely. And it's important here to think about the type of political humor, right? So you have your straightforward satire, like on, say, Last Week Tonight with John Oliver,
Yeah.
where they're often delivering a very clear message. But then you have that more layered satire, like on Samantha Bee's Full Frontal, where there's more meaning below the surface.
So you have to pay a little bit more attention with that one, with those layered ones.
Exactly, yeah. And that extra layer, that irony, the sarcasm, can be really engaging. Though whether it actually changes people's opinions, that's debatable. The book also talks about self-deprecating political humor, which, studies have shown, can actually make people view a politician more favorably.
So it's like they're showing they're human, that
Yeah.
they don't take themselves too seriously.
Exactly, exactly. Now, on the flip side, you have disparagement humor, right? The kind of jokes that target specific groups, often based on things like race, gender, and the book tackles the sensitive area too.
Right, the kind that you might laugh at, but then you're kind of like, ooh, should I have laughed at that?
Yes. And it really highlights the paradoxical nature of humor, because it can be used to convey prejudice, right? But at the same time, it often escapes serious criticism because, it's just a joke.
So it's like harmful stereotypes can kind of hide behind humor in a way.
Unfortunately, yeah. But here's the thing. The book argues that this same type of humor, it can actually also be used to expose and challenge prejudice too.
It's like holding up a mirror, kind of, to society's biases and forcing people to confront these uncomfortable truths through humor.
Exactly. Think about comedians who use satire to really challenge things like sexism or racism. They're taking those stereotypes, those harmful stereotypes, and turning them on their head, making us rethink our own biases.
It's like walking this fine line using humor to challenge these things, but without actually making those biases even worse, you know?
Exactly. And it's super important to be aware of something the book calls cavalier humor beliefs, or CHB for short.
CHB.
Yeah, it's this tendency to see all humor as harmless no matter what, like dismissing any possibility of a negative impact.
So like brushing off a joke that might be offensive with, oh, they're just jokes, lighten up.
Exactly, yeah. And the CHB thing, It can actually mask unconscious biases. Like someone with high CHB might laugh at a racist joke and not even realize the prejudice underneath it.
Wow, so it's almost like they're giving themselves permission to just find something funny when maybe it shouldn't be okay.
Precisely. And this actually leads us to how humor plays into group dynamics, especially when there are power imbalances.
So not just individual bias then, but how humor can actually, what, uphold or challenge those power structures that are already in place.
Exactly. Humor can be a tool, right, to maintain control, reinforce those stereotypes we were just talking about, keep things the way they are. But on the other hand, it can also be used to, poke fun at authority, maybe even disrupt those very structures.
So that's interesting. It's like humor can be both a weapon and a shield depending on how it's used in those social situations.
That's a great way to put it. And the thing is, how we interpret humor, it often really depends on our own position in society, our own experiences, right? A joke that one group finds hilarious might be really offensive to another.
It's like a good reminder that humor is subjective. It's tied to the context, to who's telling the joke, who's hearing it. What's hilarious to one person can be super hurtful to another.
Absolutely. And this actually brings us to what the book calls humor competence, which I think is a really interesting concept.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that a little bit. What does it actually mean to humor competent?
Well, it's about being able to use humor effectively, but also appropriately, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just about being funny. It's about knowing which type of humor fits the situation, fits the audience, and of course, being able to deliver it well.
So it's kind of like being socially aware and sensitive when you're using humor. It's not just about cracking jokes.
Exactly. And this is crucial in places like classrooms, workplaces, right? Where inappropriate humor can have, like, real consequences.
Right, right. And the book gives some good examples, I thought, of what's okay and what's not okay in those settings.
Yeah. Like in a classroom, for example, related humor. So humor that's actually tied to what's being taught, that tends to be seen as appropriate. But then unrelated humor, that can be distracting, even disrespectful.
So a teacher making a joke about like a concept they're teaching versus just telling a random joke about, I don't know, their pet or something.
Exactly. And then you have things like self-deprecating humor, which can work well sometimes. But if a teacher uses it too much, it can actually make them seem less credible.
Yeah, I can see that. Like anything else, moderation is key, I guess.
Definitely.
Speaking of different contexts for humor, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about humor in romantic relationships. The book actually emphasizes how important shared humor is, especially for long-term happiness in a couple.
Oh, absolutely. Shared humor, it's like a couple's own inside language. It
Right.
brings them closer, helps them get through challenges, and it can even act as a buffer against stress.
Yeah, it's like having those inside jokes that no one else gets, just the two of you.
Exactly. And remember those four aspects of humor in relationships we talked about a while ago. Similarity attraction, social penetration, emotion regulation, and behavioral signaling. All those come into play here too.
Right. Those are really interesting. How humor shows you're compatible, how it builds intimacy, how it helps couples cope with stuff. And it even signals good traits to your partner, right?
Right.
It's really fascinating stuff. So, okay, we've gone really deep into all this. How humor impacts like persuasion, how it plays into social dynamics, even love. What would you say is the main takeaway for people to remember from all this?
I think if we had to boil it all down, the biggest thing is just realizing that humor is way more powerful and complex
Yeah.
than we tend to give it credit for. It's
Yeah.
not just about laughs, right? It really affects how we see things, how we act, even how we could maybe change the world around us.
It makes you think about it differently, for sure. And that actually kind of leads into that really interesting question the book leaves us with. What if the most powerful humor, it's not just the stuff that makes us laugh the hardest, but the stuff that actually makes us think critically about ourselves, about the world, everything? That is a really good question, isn't it? Can humor actually be used as a tool for positive change? Can it help us all get along better, challenge injustice, even create a world that's more fair and kind to everyone?
Those are questions we could spend a whole other deep dive exploring, probably. But for now, that's something to think about. Just remember, humor, it's more than just entertainment. It really does reflect who we are, what we believe in, how we connect to everything around us. Pay attention to it. You might be surprised what you discover.